Welcome again to American Zarathustra, episode 35. It's my pleasure to introduce a great visual artist in the white positive sphere. On Twitter, she describes herself as a little artsy, a little craftsy, a little political, wife and pattern recognizer, someone they kvetch about. So her Instagram is called Artemisian Aesthetic. There you can see book covers she's done for content producers in the white identity politics sphere. Books such as Plastic Empire by John Q. Publius, Josh Neal's The Politically Correct Guide to Dating. She's done graphic design with portraits of journalist, performance artist, and comic book author Martina Markota. She did a stellar CD cover for Metamorphosis, which is a new album by Hyreth, who will be featured on the show in March. So join us for that. Her own artwork is an excellent example of Imperium art. So we're very happy to have her today. And I would say that she works in a style that I would call archaeofuturist. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Jay LaDarc. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you doing?
Oh, so good. I've just been so excited, looking forward to chatting with you and getting into it and talking about your work. It's just really exciting to have another visual artist on the show. There's a lot of musicians and philosophers in our sphere, in the white positive sphere, and so it's so great to be able to talk with another artist. So that's great. So let's also quickly say hello to my friend and co-host Nullus, Gaius Nullus. How are you, sir?
Hello, Donald, and hello, Jay LaDarc, and hello to the audience.
Super, super. So let's just get right into it. Jay, if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself, what you do, where they can find your work.
Well, as you've already kind of introduced, I'm mostly a graphic artist. I do some dabbling in painting and kind of home decor stuff as well, but graphics are my primary medium. Um, I actually like to describe myself more as a designer rather than an artist, but that's also
Okay.
just because of what I associate with the word artist nowadays, which
Oh,
is,
okay. Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like artist, you kind of associate narcissist with it a little bit these days,
Are you
because
are,
of
you- are you
modern
referring
culture.
to me? No, I'm kidding. Just
No. No, but yeah, so that's mostly what I do. You can find my graphics on Instagram at artemisian_aesthetic, and you can find my painting and other little dabblings on Telegram. It's what I don't even remember what I called it, what like Jayla Dark's Comfy Arts and Crafts Chamber or something like
cool.
that. Yeah.
Cool. Just for the audience's sake, what's the difference between a designer and an artist, or design and art per se?
Um, Design is a little bit more technical
Mm-hmm.
than art. Art is a little bit more free flowing, kind of just comes from within, when design is, I guess, more of a skill. It's about placement, it's about layout, it's not just something that flows from you. You've got to actually be able to lay something out. Like for a book cover, for example, you
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to see the whole thing laid out flat in front of you and be able to place things that way. So, I mean, it also goes into like interior design and all kinds of stuff. It's about layout more like.
Mm-hmm, hmm. So what are the skills that a professional designer needs to work these days?
Um,
Like
Vision.
software and yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, you mean like software
Oh, the
wise?
whole package. Yeah. Like you like talking about vision is interesting because that would be style, I guess. Like what is your style or your vision? What are your personal aesthetics as a designer? I imagine that plays into it.
I'm very eclectic, actually, when it comes to like my own space. There's
Mm,
not any one style you'll find in my own space. I kind of just gather a bunch of things that I like from a bunch of different time periods, and it can go anywhere from stuff that's hyper modern to stuff that's hyper traditional and stuff from antiquity. And so I'm
mm.
very, very eclectic in that sense. But as far as like my graphic design, uh, I like to think of myself as creating a bit of a reconciliation between the classic and the modern.
Nice, very nice. So would you say graphic design is, I mean, it's under the art umbrella as far as definitions go, but for the audience's sake, where can people see graphic design? What does a graphic designer do on sort of a day-to-day basis?
Well, it depends on the kind of designer. My focus is primarily print, so you're going to see it on anything that's printed.
Mm,
You see it in posters, you see it on billboards, you see it on flags, you see it on simple
mm,
pamphlets, on business cards, just, everywhere. I mean, there's graphic designers that focus on web,
mm.
um, and so you'll see it on web banners and advertisements. It's everywhere around us all the time.
Hmm, hmm. Interesting. So it's in a sense it really goes over into the commercial arts in some sense, I would imagine.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because graphic design is very much about marketability.
Hmm, hmm. Very nice. So that actually informs your work in an interesting way. I think that to some extent, perhaps graphic designers are better communicators. That I think it's their job to communicate something, and so they're really really plugged in with the elements and principles of design and how to organize colors and shapes, lines, flow, uh, rhythms, emphasis, all these, and even typography that plays a big role in it as well. So that just helps to give people a general sense of your work. And of course, there's always links at the bottom of the show. People need to go look at your work, and it'll plug in really nicely with our conversation today. So, how did you? Let's kind of turn it around a little bit here. So, Imperium Art is basically a documentary series where we're talking about um, artists coming out of white identity politics. So before we get into that, let me turn it over to Nullus just for a second. Let him comment a bit.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
How does propaganda fit into this conceptualization of art and design and marketability and so from purely a let's just say a visual arts point of view, how would you define propaganda in this context?
Well, I'd actually argue that propaganda and making things that are marketable are almost identical. Instead of selling a product, you're selling an idea or a feeling
Hmm.
or a what's the word that I'm looking at? Sympathy. You're trying to
Right.
make people sympathetic to your ideas, to your cause. So it's basically same thing as trying to sell a product, but you're trying to sell that instead.
You're selling a message, right? That's
Exactly. You're selling
yeah,
an idea and a sympathy.
It's
interesting. Yeah.
interesting because like the term selling an idea, it's okay. I mean, just look on face value. But I don't know because I'm excited about the concept of propaganda. We talk about it on the show. We don't again have a lot of visual artists to talk about it. So I think that, like if you were to look at your own work, would you call your own work propaganda?
Um, yes, but not necessarily intentionally.
Hmm.
Like I just a lot of my artwork, it depends on what you're looking at because my Instagram is really kind of a hodgepodge between work I've just done for myself and work that I've done for other people. So it kind of goes in and out of that. So yeah, I mean, even the work that I've just done, I guess for myself or for our audience, I suppose you could say, does have a bit of propaganda in it because it is giving our own sympathies back
Right.
to us.
Would you say that propaganda could also be art as well as
Oh,
design?
absolutely. Absolutely. I
So
mean,
it's sort of in both
there's a
sides of
fine
it.
line. Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean there is a line like there is the kind of design that is I guess what you'd see in most of like the corporate world, which is honestly mostly terrible. It's all just technical and kind of bland, but you can also see stuff that is highly artistic that does the same thing.
It's important to say that we are bombarded with leftist propaganda all the time in TV, everywhere you look. Then essentially, the media is controlled by the left, and they're constantly putting messages in there that I think people who watch this show are aware of. So it's not that we're not. I think the average person should be aware of these things, be able to see it. But in terms of the concept of, say, like your work, for example, it matters to you. It's an expression of your values. You have a strong graphic design approach to the way that you express your ideas. So it's interesting because I guess what I'm saying is that propaganda, I think, is associated with some kind of value system or ideology, whereas art maybe not so much. It could be maybe just more about history or religion or personal feelings or thoughts or personal experiences. So there's a kind of a scale here, maybe a gradient of one's personal experience being on the art end of the scale, whereas pure political propaganda on the other end of the scale. But our personal experiences cross over into politics, right? You know, identity politics. So how we're represented in the media, it matters, right? And so that helps the audience, I think, to get maybe a better context or sort of a bird's eye view of those things. How, as a designer, do you feel like you have eyes to see things that most people don't in terms of propaganda in the media?
Yes and no. I guess yes, because I kind of have a mind that just sees patterns
Mm.
and, will recreate patterns, and that's just what I see. And also in the sense that I can kind of step back and see a whole. And that's actually what I was referring to earlier when I said vision, not like it's being able to take a space or a layout and see what it's going to be before it exists.
Okay, so you don't mean vision as in a visionary, someone who has kind of an imaginative view of a future world or a certain kind of ideas that are idealistic. I
Well,
mean,
I'd say those things go together. They're
okay.
they're very similar. Like, I mean, yes and no. It's being able to see like just some, or even just some raw materials in front of you, and just seeing
Mm.
how you're going to put them together to create something that doesn't exist yet, which is something that a lot of people don't have. Like being able to walk into, for example, a room that is a total and complete mess, and seeing the stuff that's in there and saying, okay, well, I can make this look actually really nice by putting this there, that there, that there. And then you're able to see how it all comes together as a picture in your head.
So I would say you have a strong sense of design then, if you have that ability to vision, if you will, using it as a verb. That's definitely an important thing for aesthetic living as well, right? And it's really, I guess that's not something everybody possesses. So it's a good quality, but I think it's important also to, for the audience sake, at least, to talk about kind of the range between our personal art and the work we do for hire, you know, as freelancers, or if you work for a company, say as a graphic designer, you're, in a sense, I guess that, you know, you're working for somebody. You're a hired pencil, so to speak. They say, I want A, B, C, D. You know, I have this mission I need to accomplish, whatever it might be. You know, selling something or an album cover or a T-shirt, who knows. So then you serve the client's interests, right? And you do bring your own touch or aesthetics to it in some sense, but then in your own work, you carry those skills back to your world where you're thinking, how can I convey my ideas? You know, so can you
Donald,
talk a
can
little
I,
bit about? Oh yeah, go ahead, Noah.
before I just thought about something as you were speaking about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're sort of hinting at is the l'art pour l'art kind of, art for art's sake paradigm. But if you think about it, medieval art, a lot of 19th century art, and we're talking high art, was made on commission.
Mm-hmm.
And so, portraits, or if you go into the cathedrals, you'll see the frescoes in the churches, or the statues. A lot of that was done on commission. Some mentor wanted to have something immortalized, either themselves, or they wanted to present something either romantic. If it was a 19th century patron, then they would want to have some kind of romantic depiction of it. So maybe to me, this is a difficult question, because in the modern age we see a lot of technical art, like both of you were talking about. But then, when you're doing something on commission, does that necessarily mean that it's not art? So just to educate me as the, someone who really doesn't understand these differences.
Jay?
I'd say no. I mean, a lot of times what you do on commission is absolutely art. I mean, it's kind of hard to draw the line there. Like a lot of those really crappy cartoons that you see in commercials, or that, some corporate job makes you watch to instill their values in
Yeah.
you. And so I would not call that art, although certainly it is an artist that is unfortunately having to create it, but something like the Pietà that is a commission is absolutely art. And I think the difference is probably just beauty. And then as far as like the difference between kind of like an art for art's sake versus like specific marketing or propaganda is I'd say art is kind of something that is just inside of you. I don't know if either of you guys have this, where you'll get this idea or just this drive inside of you it's almost kind of like being pregnant with an idea, and it wants to come out, and it needs to come out, and it'll drive you crazy until you create it.
Yes, yes. As a writer, I can say that when I'm creating something, a story, a poem, or what have you, I haven't done anything on commission, but I can imagine that there are many, and there were historically many famous poets and writers who were also journalists. So obviously, there's an element of the commercialization of their talents, versus the artistic expression of their talent. But I think that this gradient might have something to do with intention. So whether or not the intention of the artist is to let's say that they are doing something on commission, but at the same time, while they're doing something on commission, they unintentionally create something that is an expression of their deeper emotion, is an expression of their deeper connection to a metaphysical reality, or maybe an expression of a cultural reality that is just organic in them. And I think that when that's expressed naturally through, whether it's through commission or whether it's a work, an individual art for art's sake kind of work, I think that might be the gradient to measure it by. But again, I'm also not against the idea of propaganda being a type of art. But yeah, there's this fine line, and this is a fascinating conversation. So,
right, and you can also see, like I was talking about with like those horrible corporate commercial cartoons, you can kind of see the deadness and the soul of the poor artist that had to make it shine through in those. Just how I don't even know how to explain it other than dead and soulless, and you can see that that definitely shines through as how unenjoyable it must be to make.
I think I have let me just jump in real fast here. I have a point that tags onto that really nicely. As an artist, I would say art to the artist must have ownership of the communication on some level. So if I get a commission, I'm doing a commission right now painting the Romans sacking the temple in Jerusalem. It's an enormous commission, and it's somebody else's painting. I'm just duplicating, but I feel ownership of it somehow through this process. So whereas if I get another commission saying, "Oh, I need a business card and it has to say ABC and I want a picture of a cat on it," it's like, I don't care about that, right? But there's some level of art involved. So, and then that opens up the topic of what I would call the Caravaggio conundrum. Like, here's a man who's a brilliant painter, but an absolutely evil person who has no relationship with God or religion or any of that kind of human dimension. And so can you say that he even is connected to his art? Because I'm opening up a massive can of worms here, but let's turn it back over to Nullus.
Well, just to say, Donald, hold my beer, and and let me trump you one Caravaggio with an AI. So,
God. Yeah.
So now we're reaching a point with technological development where, okay, Caravaggio was a despicable human being, but he was a human being, so he had flaws. He was expressing maybe some kind of inner conflict that he was struggling with in his lifetime. And even an evil person can be, let's just say, interesting in the sense that they have a compelling kind of struggle going on within. And that could be expressed in their art.
You could even just call him a great craftsman. But
great craftsman, right? But when you're talking about artificial intelligence, and then this is going back to what Jay was saying, is that soulless, right? So now that we're going to start seeing these works, everything, visual art, video, music, novels, poetry, everything. So AI will be able to reproduce and create original work. But then, the question's going to remain, how soulless is this going to be? And how is this going to challenge our understanding of art going forward?
You want to grab that one, Jay, before I...
Yeah, I do. The thing about things like AI is that it requires a formula and an algorithm, which would make our job to break the formula. And obviously we know what those formulas are going to be based on the horrible values, if you can even call them values, of our elite class. It's going to be easy enough for people like us to break, which is going to continue to make us the people who are subversive and transgressive and ultimately attractive, especially to younger people.
Mm-hmm. There's so many directions we could take this conversation in, and I like Jay's approach. I like how she seized on that particular point. What I was thinking of while listening to you, Nullus, was about, you figure, imagine a machine that can make, quote, art. So, something that it's sort of duplicating the human experience and making something that we humans would have an aesthetic experience with. So the art object, in some way, is how can I say, like if you were walking through the woods and you see a gnarled up old rotten tree stump and there's something really beautiful about it to you, then you have an aesthetic experience. You could take a really nice photograph or do a painting of it, or write a poem about it or something, and that is real art because it comes from a human being. So I think of any kind of art that's created by AI, in a sense, as a secondary object of art, and only so much as we define it as that. The machine can't make art. We can define it as art. Right. So
yeah, I'm just sorry to interrupt, but my problem with it is, will we be able to recognize it? You see where I'm going? So if you objectively look at two paintings, one was created by an artist and the other was created by artificial intelligence, will we be able to, just on face value, will we be able to differentiate between the two? And that's the big question that I have.
Well, Jay, do you want to jump on that before I respond?
No, and that's actually a really good question, because I'm sure you guys have played with that portrait AI thing where you just kind of upload a picture of yourself and it turns it into a different kind of painting. They use various painting styles, and it is really hard to be able to tell the difference between that and real art. But again, I think that the way that we can tell the difference is that if you look at that AI, for example, it's all pre-made filters. It's all stuff that has been done before. None of it is new. None of it is groundbreaking. None of it is exactly very specific. You can tell that there's no fingerprint on it.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine that somebody somewhere is inventing a robot that can make something that approaches art. But I would kind of step back a little bit and say, to me, this is the analogy of going to see a ballet versus watching a ballet on TV. So being in the theater and watching a ballet, for example, with the music and the lighting and the whole experience, that's real art per se, right? Whereas seeing it through a TV, it's kind of, there's a barrier there where you're seeing it through a lens, if you will, through a box of some kind, right? And you don't think of it like I'm watching TV, right? You're a human being and you're responding to something that is aesthetic or beautiful, right?
Maybe the way to look at it is look for the flaws, and when you see the flaws, then you understand that it's human because it's fallible. If it's a flawless kind of...
My message really is that art is always going to be between a human being and an aesthetic object. Whoever or however that aesthetic object is created, I don't know how significant that is particularly, but that's my opinion. What do you think, Jay?
No, I agree with as far as looking for the flaws go, because a human touch is going to be a flawed touch, as
Mm,
opposed to the AI, which again is going to be very
formulaic.
formulative, whatever word, you
Yeah.
know what word I'm looking for.
Yes,
I just
that.
can't say it. Yes.
Well,
But
our audience is psychic. They can read your mind. I
yeah,
know.
like if you see a picture that looks just like a Van Gogh painting, but clearly there's no way Van Gogh could have painted it, it's created by a machine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think
Exactly.
it's neat, it's fun, I guess. It's cute, I guess, in some way. But I don't feel threatened by it. I think that you can't invent something. You can only filter something in that sense.
I mean,
But I don't know. Go ahead. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
do and I don't. I don't in the sense that I believe that our people will see through it, because as I've heard from others, they've talked about is that it's our people specifically who really care about authenticity.
Mm.
And it's as our societies and our cultures become increasingly dominated by others, that authenticity will matter less. And that is concerning. I mean, we are facing what could potentially be a very dead world.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you think about it, if you look at the cryptocurrencies as an example, the reason I'm bringing that up is because cryptocurrencies are created based on an algorithm, right? So if you have an AI that's created, an artistic AI based on some particular algorithm, then that might become, some people will say that, let's just call it Van Gogh 2.0 is the name of the algorithm, and then people are going to follow Van Gogh 2.0's creations just like they're following cryptocurrencies now. So again, I don't hope this happens, but you do see like this kind of trend with people to look for the easy way out of looking for aesthetic value, and so this might be something that could happen in the future.
Mhm. It brings up the question of critiquing things, and this is something I'd like to get into more with our audience, and maybe I could have a panel discussion with, say, a bunch of visual artists that I could gather and look at these works and critique them per se. But I just wanted to say, Van Gogh 2.0, that's the name of our next band right there. So that's settled. Um, Anyway, so let's move on here. I like to try to learn a little bit more about our guests' racial awakening. Like, how did you come to the white positive sphere? If you could go into that a little bit, Jay.
Well, I've always kind of been forced to be somewhat racially aware growing up my whole life, because I've always lived in very diverse areas.
Mm,
So I've never not been aware completely racially, but when I first started becoming really, really conscious of it, I could say was several years ago. I'm one of the people who fell down the YouTube algorithm pipeline,
mm, mm.
which basically what that did for me was give me the vocabulary and a more rounded understanding of things that I already knew.
And who were you watching? Like, who were you following that helped you to get that vocabulary?
Honestly, Millennial Woes was one of the first ones. I used to listen to him while I painted all the time.
Mm,
Yeah, I used to listen to him. I found, Richard Spencer. I found Mike Enoch. There was Tara McCarthy back when she was still active, and Brittany Pettibone, and even Lauren Southern. So
yeah.
this was quite a while ago. This was
Oh yeah.
several years ago. But yeah,
Hmm.
and that's what kind of led me down that.
I got your point. Yeah. Where would you like? Who are you kind of watching these days? Like, who's on your radar? Like people or any kind of content that you really enjoy?
I listen to a lot of TRS.
TRS. That's a big one. A lot of our guests and friends are into TRS quite a lot. That's cool.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of TRS, and other than that, I've actually kind of largely checked out a lot of politics, because it's kind of like, well, where can I go from here? I guess it's networking and working with people now at this point. So most of my, I guess, YouTube feed this days, on top of, the massive deplatforming that has happened
Hmm. Hmm.
over time, a lot of it is mostly just art related and design related, and I like those ambiance videos and stuff like that.
That actually flows perfectly into my next question. So, what are your views on the current state of affairs, and what are your strategies going forward?
I mean, my own personal strategies is just to continue networking and offering my skills where I can to people who I think are worthy of working with.
Hmm. Hmm. So you don't have any kind of, I guess maybe the bigger question is, do you feel like we as a movement are threatened in some way, being deplatformed, or, what kind of changes do you think we might, or challenges we might face in the near or not so near future?
I think that we are partially our own worst enemy, and that is due to the very online nature of it.
Hmm.
Um, when you're all anonymous and you're all online, you could be
Yeah.
talking to anybody. And that leaves us very vulnerable to manipulation. And on top of manipulation, there's something about the way you communicate through a screen to another person.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're not really a person to you, like they're not really real. And you
Mhm.
see this a lot with like people who are content creators. And you have to check yourself with this too, really, really big ones that might not be in our sphere or whatever. It's hard to view them as real people, kind of
Mm.
the way that we view the people on TV.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, oh, they're not going to read this anyways, so what does it matter?
Mhm.
But they do. And so I think largely we are also, again, our own worst enemy. There's a lot of narratives in our sphere that I think are really terrible, honestly, but it's become kind of just part of the whole thing.
Mhm.
And it's hard to tell whether it's subversion or what it is, or if it's sincere. I don't know, but we're very vulnerable because of the very online nature of this.
I see. Do you think there's any sort of way around that or a solution to that?
Um, to check yourself, really, and to, I guess, get more involved in the real world if and when you can, to log out more,
Yeah.
to, uh, I guess, make your own life the kind of life that you want to see in others.
Mm-hmm. So it almost kind of suggests that there should even be a certain protocol, or at least a standard of behavior in our sphere about how we interact with each other, a certain, I don't
I
know,
mean,
mutual respect or certain ways. What do you think?
that'd be nice, but there's no way to enforce it.
Yeah.
So kind of expecting that is kind of silly. It's not going to
Oh,
happen because there's no way to enforce it. You've also got a lot of people who are just kind of drifting in and out of this thing or whatever, who are mildly interested but don't take it seriously.
hmm. Hmm. I tend to see age and maturity relationships. So a certain kind of, naturally younger people tend to be a little more shitlordish, or they tend to want to go in and scuffle, whereas and then there's a lot of, I don't know, just people making massive assumptions about stuff. There's overlaps into people's personal problems, and it's tricky. I guess I personally would like it if people were a little more professional in the way that they behaved, so that the movement overall obviously had a higher standard, but also that when people were judging us from outside the movement, that they could see people of caliber. So
Right.
that's something there. What are your thoughts on this, Nullus?
Well, the real life aspect is probably the most important one to consider. I think that it's important to network, to use these various social media platforms to network, to get to know other people better, to understand the various nuances a little bit better. Not everyone's going to have the same opinion, and I think that there's nothing wrong with having various opinions. The question is more on how we relate to each other with our different opinions and our different ideologies or our different points of view, and even our different identities, because we have to be honest, saying white is this very monolithic term, but if you break it down, there's big differences between various European cultures and between the United States and Australia, or the United States and Europe. So there
Mm.
are significant differences culturally, there's significant differences ideologically, there's significant differences religiously, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
What we have to learn to do is, and I think when Jay was saying that, people tend to act differently online, I think that in person, you tend to be a little bit more guarded, and you tend to be a little bit more conciliatory with other people to work in a social setting. So I
Mm.
think we have to learn to work with each other in a more adult manner. With that said, we also have to understand that there's a lot of people out there who are very vulnerable, very lost, lonely, trying to figure everything out. They lash out because they don't understand what's going on around them, or they lash out because they're trying to figure out what's going on around them. So it's not just subversion, although the subversion is very strong and the subversion is very dangerous, and it's also very disruptive. But I would not say that everyone is a subversive element. I think that there are a lot of people who are crying out basically for help through their spurging, if you will, you know. So I think we have to take that into consideration. Maybe to finish it off, you know, Timothy Leary, you know, he said, what did he say? Turn on, tune in, drop out, right?
Yeah.
So maybe what we have to say is turn off, tune out, and drop in.
Nice, nice. Well done. You just took that away from him and you own it now. That's good. So Jay, on the topic of networking, you've worked with a couple fairly big names in our sphere. Could you talk about that a little bit? Who have you worked with your commissions, book covers, artworks, portraits, and how did that come to be? How did you connect with them?
Oh, I've worked with quite a few people, so it's hard to remember all of them. One of my first commissions for book cover was John Q. Publius, and he reached out to me for Plastic Empire, so I made that, and I'm not gonna lie, it's a pretty ugly book cover, but that was on purpose. So I purposely made it pretty ugly because the topic is pretty ugly, and it covers the ugliness of our society and who rules it. So I thought that was a pretty good messaging. I said, this is the book. Yeah, it's not pretty, you know.
Now, did you work with him to come up with that design, or what was the creative process for that?
It was pretty much entirely mine, actually. He let me have a lot of creative leniency, just told me just go for it. And I said, okay, well, here it is. So I just kind of went with it. I've also worked with Richard Spencer and Edward Dutton for a couple of his books, which I haven't posted my Instagram because I don't know, it's just one of those things I haven't gotten around to with formatting the images and actually putting them up there. It's one of those things I keep forgetting to do. So I did the cover for his newest release of what is it? Islam, an evolutionary perspective. I did that one, and I also did but it's his book on race. I did that one as well. And part of
to Edward Dutton's book on race, correct?
Yes. Okay. And so part of the reason why I haven't really uploaded them yet is that they were both very specific in what they wanted, so I almost feel like I didn't do much designing.
I see. Yeah. So they had the idea and hired you to execute it, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, I really did exactly what they wanted, and it did turn out, both of them did turn out really nice. So I am glad with how they came out, but it was primarily their ideas that I put onto printability, made printable.
Nullus, did you have a question?
Yeah, you know, you brought up this interesting point that you said that the cover was ugly, but it was deliberately ugly. And it kind of brings this question up about, you know, we always talk about aesthetics, and we always talk about aesthetic value and why aesthetics are important, and they are, and I don't want to downplay that importance. At the same time, you know, we do have to express difficult emotions, difficult themes, ugly themes that we have to express somehow. And that definitely doesn't really present an aesthetic value per se, but what we're doing through it is in the art, what we're creating essentially is a message, a call, if you will. So recently I just shared a poem that I wrote, which was full of expletives, and it was a lot cruder than I would normally write. And so it wasn't, you know, it was a different style, somewhat of a departure from my other poems. And I did that deliberately, and I was on the fence about it. Donald, you and I were talking about this. I was on the fence about sharing this poem or not sharing this poem. Yeah. I was concerned that I would, you know, I'm sort of walking away from an aesthetic point of view or a more elegant expression of emotion with something that's more raw, more crude, and has that element in it. But then, you know, at the same time, I said, you know, it's important. We have to share everything. We have to share the critical messages. We have to critique ourselves. We have to be able to, call ourselves to look in the mirror, if you will. And so we also have to express certain emotions that are a lot more guttural than they are, aesthetically pleasing, right? So to me, the question is, how do we balance this aspect with the aesthetic, with the pursuit of aesthetics?
What do you say, Jay? I can grab that, but I'd like to hear Jay's response.
Well, it's really hard to, it's a hard question to answer, honestly. I'm one of those people, I think that something that's ugly can be artistic. Absolutely. Who's that artist? I can't remember the name of the artist, but it's the painting of Jupiter eating one of his children.
Oh yeah, Goya, I believe.
Goya, yeah, it's hideous.
Yeah.
Oh, it's hideous, but it's absolutely a piece of art, classical art. Because it's hideous, but the execution is also beautiful at the same time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times art is meant to give a message, and that message is not always beautiful. So how do we balance the aesthetic with that? I don't know. Either it's good or it's not.
Every artist has to grapple with that. I want to add here the concept of theater. And so in Nullus's poem, which I gotta say I think is one of his best poems, he's swearing very angrily at a person that he's sort of directing this message to, and man, it feels good. It's like yeah, I really wanted to say that, and he's able to. I kind of experience this art vicariously through him and his reading, and I feel that specifically poetry has an element of theater to it because it's spoken or written. It's language. It's not just kind of visual, right? So there's almost an acting involved, I guess, and a story involved. So there's that. But yeah, coming back to the question though, is how do we reconcile sort of ugliness with aesthetics? And it's a good question to kind of leave open. Like I said earlier, I think every artist has to grapple with that. It depends on what it is you are communicating. So, but then, I've seen works of art that I wouldn't call art or are just kind of real sort of garbage art, sort of like has almost like a punk rock aesthetic to it, where it's intentionally ugly or maybe
gratuitous.
That's actually a good word. Works that are gratuitous or that try too hard to offend, I think that it loses the art of art, if you will. And I don't like that. I mean, I personally don't care for like crass or crude kind of artworks, I guess, if you will. But anyway, it's a big question, and maybe we'll leave it at that.
Well, there is some stuff that's created that's just ugliness for the sake of ugliness. And you see this a lot, like you were saying, with punk rock, and then there was the grunge movement. And it's just, it's kind of just an expression of the ugly parts and the ugly sides of humanity and the human soul and spirit, like the loneliness and depravity. And it's just, it's there for its own sake. There's not really anything really aesthetic about it. It's just gross.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Oh no, just let me get this out. That leans into the topic of postmodernism, which I believe is intentionally artless or ugly in the sense of it wants to destroy aesthetics. It's meant to be dead and non-aesthetic, if you will. So that's a different kind of ugly, whereas like the sort of the punk rock ugly art is cool in its own way, and even crude kinds of, say, political cartoons can be ugly and goofy and stuff, and that if it communicates the message and the feeling, that works, Nullus?
Yeah, I think that the other issue, so the first word I would use is gratuitous, but the other one is to celebrate the ugly, right? So we don't want to celebrate the ugly. And I think that by presenting something that might be ugly or crude, but not in a celebratory manner, but in I'm going to be very careful. I don't want to say moralizing manner because I don't really like to say that. What I would rather say is more as a kind of a lesson, if you will, that, you're looking at ugliness because you're presenting something that is representative of an emotion to bring you to a higher level of aesthetics, if that makes any sense.
So you might use the word parable or myth, maybe,
Yes.
rather than moralizing, but those have morals in them. They're baked into them, right?
Well, when I say moralizing, I think what I really mean is I just want to avoid that moralizing finger at the audience. That's really what I'm getting at.
Which interestingly leans into propaganda, right?
Right.
In maybe a non-aesthetic way, or maybe not. I mean, these are gauges that move up and down depending on the artwork you're looking at. But strangely enough, this flows beautifully into my next question. So the angels of podcasting are looking over us tonight, I guess. That's really good. So describing your work, Jay, your aesthetics, tell us about the highlights in your work. Tell us about your plans with your art, your goals. What are your standards you hold to yourself, and then goals for your career as an artist?
Usually when I step back from a piece, I like to ask myself, how's the composition? How are the colors? Just basic questions like that. How does it all flow together? I'm really a huge fan of complementary colors. I like opposite colors. I think they look really nice together.
Me too.
So as far as like goals go, my main goals are usually just for it to look nice. I just want it to look pretty. I'm not very good at waxing poetic. I'm not a poet. I'm not good at waxing poetic about my visual art. A lot of times, normally what it is does it look cool? Yes, mission accomplished.
I think Nullus is for hire if you need that. Just
yeah.
Yeah.
Please describe my work for me, Nullus. I can't do it. I just think it looks cool. That's why I made it. But
awesome. I'll just say awesome.
It's not too moralizing. No. I would love to see your work next to Nullus's poetry in a book. I think that would actually be stunning.
I was actually thinking about saying something about something like that, maybe plans for the future of as a doing some collab. We could pair art with poetry and maybe do a book. That'd be cool.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And we're connected with so many different publishers in our sphere. So that's definitely worth talking about. I'm at your Instagram right now looking through your work. And as an art teacher and pro artist myself, one thing I'm noticing a lot of is a good sense of balance in your work. And interestingly, you were talking about color. There's a really strong use of black and white, though, so you might have some kind of black and white sculpture with that a highlight of blue or a highlight of red or something in here. So the contrast, that really creates a sense of contrast. And it's just lovely work. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about your vision in the sense of like, what's the world you're trying to create with your art? Or what is maybe the ideal reaction that you'd like people to get from it?
Kind of a sense of hope for the future. As dark as the future may look, there is a sense of hope as well. I mean, that's part of what I try to create is a reconciliation between the classic and the modern, like I said earlier. So in the sense of archaeofuturism that you use, the term that you used earlier, I want to bring the past to the future. If that makes sense. It's kind of a sense of the eternal. I want to project the eternal.
That lines up perfectly with Imperium Art and the idea of creating a continuity, reaching into our past and building that bridge into the future. So archaeofuturism as an art style or art movement, I don't know what we want to call it, is precisely that. And you do it very well. So I would certainly compliment you on that and urge the audience to go check it out. What's your process in terms of how you build a work of art?
It's different from each one. A lot of times I'll just be scrolling through source images and I'll see something and go, wow, I really like that. So I'll just save it and then I'll start playing with it. And a lot of times I don't have any vision at all. I just start playing with it and go from there. And then sometimes I'll get a specific idea in my head. I don't have a particular formula or process. It really varies. I'm very sporadic in the way I do it.
So you just work with a few basic elements and then just kind of feel it out what you want to add. So I'm looking at a piece right now. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Has a statue of Hygeia. I don't know how to pronounce her name. So it's like the goddess of cleanliness. And then
In medicine.
in medicine, okay.
Hmm.
And in the background, there's sort of a forest-looking background, and then this kind of weird, almost like a distorted TV screen type texture to it. So that all obviously is classic archaeofuturism, but then there's a balance to it. This has a really strong graphic design quality. I think maybe all of your work does actually. So I think it's an interesting question for every artist to say, well, what are our weaknesses? Where do you feel there's room to grow or improve on what you're doing?
I tend to get stuck
In
archaeofuturism.
okay.
I tend to get stuck trying to recreate that style. I feel like the last couple of months I've gotten really good at breaking out of that, but you start to get into a cycle of a specific style and you stay there. And I feel like it's really good for an artist to break out of the style that you're comfortable with. So I tend to obsess over a certain style for some months or even years at a time, and I'll only do that. And then I'll find myself doing the exact same filters and the exact same layers and the exact same compositions, and it gets boring.
Yeah, yeah. It's formulaic after a while, and then that takes the passion and joy out of it, really. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about the CD cover you did for Hyrith.
Oh, that's one of my favorites.
She's absolutely beloved in the White Art Collective. I cannot say enough about her and her music. So
she's such a sweetheart too.
Yeah, and there's that. But did you both talk about this together? It seems to me like she'd be the kind of person who would want to be involved in the design. I don't know.
Oh, for sure, for sure. She originally sent me some pictures that she had taken to give me an idea of what she wanted. She was fairly specific, but she did also give me a lot of leniency, a lot of artistic room. Unfortunately, the pictures that she had taken that she had sent me, I couldn't work with. They just weren't posed properly. I actually had to I had to bully my sister on Christmas to pose for me with my fancy camera. I'm like, all right, we're doing this. You're going to get in there in this stupid cloak that I have, and you are going to pose for me. So, which, was fine because there's no face in it or anything. But, yeah, so she gave me a lot of room to work with. I really, really enjoyed that project. That was fun. And honestly, it was one that really broke me out of kind of my artistic slump that I was having. So I've been doing a lot more since then in different styles.
So I assume you've listened to her music, and do you listen to her music while you were doing this project?
Oh, absolutely. I just listened to that album on loop while I created it.
Yeah, because I actually hear the music while I'm looking at the cover of it. It's so Hyrith. And like the way she really does have her own aesthetic, and even visually, I mean, she does her own kind of photos and whatever designs that she does for her online stuff, and you just did beautifully with it. So it's bang, you hit the nail on the head with that one.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really wanted to project that sense of indie girl rock that she has, but I didn't want it to be, kind of the bland, what you think of when you think of indie girl rock, because she's definitely not that. Her work is obviously very different and has that element of electronic music to it as well, which I wanted to put in there. So I did just listen to that album on loop while making it.
There's something spiritual about her work too, whereas say, mainstream indie quote girl rock is maybe a bit more degenerate in its own way. And so like you really captured that ethereal spiritual quality to it. It might be, I don't know, that's just me. People can go look at the work at your Instagram and decide for themselves. Were there other people that you've worked with? I saw that you've done a few portraits of Martina Markota.
Yeah, and those actually weren't commissions. I actually I chat with Martina here and there. Really sweet girl. And I just asked her, hey, can I have some of your pictures to play with? And she said yes. So I went with it, and I had a good time.
Yeah, so for people new to the show or are the White Positive Art sphere, Martina Markota has done journalism, professional journalism, but she's a performance artist and she's published her own graphic novel. She does her own YouTube show. So I strongly urge people to look that up, Lady Alchemy. So look that up. And obviously she's a model as well, so you can see that. What was your approach when you were working on portraiture of her?
Um, it was just that one picture in particular that I did that really kind of spoke memento mori to me.
The one with the skull.
Yes. And so
Mm-hmm.
I really like that phrase memento mori, to remember your own mortality.
Yeah.
I think it's very important thing to remember when trying to live life to the fullest or live the best way that you can.
Yeah.
And it just the picture itself really spoke to me in that way, and I wanted to create something that spoke that more specifically.
That's lovely. The topic of love and death kind of are in there, but you give a certain beauty with these kind of light purplish flowers and that kind of wet splashy look, the whatever filters you used. It's nicely done. I sense that you have a sort of a I don't know, a lot of the works that you do, they seem to stand alone, like they would look good on a shirt or on a poster or in a frame or something. There's what is it about your work that makes it look like that?
It's the composition.
Mm, mm,
I want it to look good printed out. When I do art and design, the way that I do it is, do I want this on my wall?
mm, mm.
You know,
Okay.
I actually don't really like offering t-shirts on my Redbubble because I don't really like graphic t-shirts, but people demanded them, so I offered them because that's what they
Yeah.
wanted. I give the
Yeah.
people what they want, but I do
Yeah.
design for walls.
Yeah. It's some years ago, somebody put the question to me, the idea of like, well, are you really an artist if you're doing it for money? And I'm like, I don't eat wallpaper, like I have to have food and rent and there's so it's weird people have odd ideas, the kind of romantic ideas about artists and yeah, we need support. We need money too, right?
It's funny
So,
that you mentioned memento mori because for many years I've had at least three different baseball caps that I went to one of these stitching places and I asked them to create a baseball cap for me with the slogan "Morituri te salutant," which is Ave Caesar, Morituri te salutant, which were theoretically, I don't know if it's true, historically accurate, but that's what they say the gladiators said. Those about to die salute you, and I have that on several baseball caps with a skull and bones underneath it. It's just funny.
wow. Wow. So now that would change sports a lot if the losing team had to be sacrificed then.
Yeah, well, that's what the Aztecs did, I think,
I
when they
know, I know. I actually brought
yeah,
that up to a friend once. Anyway, that's off topic, but
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, and
so
I actually really like the concept of when I was reading the essay about I think there was a part about talking about removing death from the arts, and I'm not sure I agree with that because I think mortality is something that makes human existence so beautiful. I mean, our mortality is what makes us reach out to what's immortal. Our mortality is what makes us care about the divine. If there was no mortality, there'd be no need for God. There'd be no need to believe in the divine. There'd be no need for beauty or anything like that because it wouldn't be temporary.
this is powerful. This gets into your personal philosophy and philosophy of art. I'd like to hear more. Like how did you come to this conclusion?
I don't know. It's just kind of I just kind of did. I mean, I've had in my personal life, I've unfortunately had a lot of brushes with death of people that I love very much.
Hmm.
I've come close to losing people that I love very much, which I luckily didn't. So I
Okay.
just
Yeah.
getting through that kind of stuff, you start to, it makes you contemplate these things, you
You know,
know.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Nullis? Go ahead,
Yeah, I'm
Nullis.
just gonna have to ask you where you found that because, or how you read that because I don't believe that. So I have to say that I agree with what you're saying that, mortality is an integral part of understanding our place in the world. So I have to find if you could find that passage, I'm gonna have to check to see where I wrote that, only because I want to make sure that I don't provide an incorrect message.
I'll be honest, your essay was extremely big-brained, and even after reading it twice, there was a lot of it that went right over my head. So maybe I'm the one who misread it. I might have very well have misread it, but that was what I'll have to go back and find it for you. What gave me that impression?
If you could, the only reason is that if it does give you that impression, then it's important for me to, make sure that I clarify it, because I agree with what you're saying. That's why, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry if I misread it.
No, not at all, not at all.
But your subject matter or your philosophy on death and how it's integral to the arts and aesthetics comes across in your work, especially through the use of the statues, because I feel that in a way these statues are, personifications of our Western spirit, and they're maybe based on people who died long ago, and so in a way they're kind of a look through time in some sense. It crystallizes a human life in time, a moment in time, and that echoes mortality, or in a sense immortality, right? That we gain immortality through the arts, or that we feel immortality in the spirit of our people through time and art. So these are big, beautiful topics, and again, it's the viewer brings this also, though. An artwork really in some way is limited to the capacity of the viewer to surrender to it and understand and embrace the aesthetics and such. But I'd say you as an artist are doing your job from your side of the screen. So that's quite beautiful.
Will you flatter me?
I'm just telling the truth. I mean, I'm not trying to.
It's true. I fully agree.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, I won't make any
I'm
jokes.
Blushing. Thanks, guys.
So I'll send some roses in the mail. No. But no, they're lovely works, and I mostly say that really for the audience, because it's so important for our people, our movement, our audience, and people who are new to Imperium art to really get into this work, to experience it. It's existential, really. We have to get into the work, surrender to the work. And our artists and creators, writers, musicians, they in a sense are kind of the shaman of our tribe, per se. They bring this across. And we may not treat ourselves or think of ourselves in that way. That might be a bit heady for some people, but so long as it comes across, then that's what matters. And your work is very successful in that way. So let me move on to the next question, so you don't have to blush anymore. Any words of advice for aspiring or professional artists coming into the white positive sphere?
Just do it. Just put your work out there. Really, honestly, what you got to do is just create the accounts, start putting your work out there, and start interacting with the people that you think will like your work. It's about interaction and just putting it out there. That's all you've got to do. And it'll get noticed at some point.
Have you had people talk to you about this or come to you for advice?
No, but I'm giving it now.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, now I think about it, there was this was like maybe a year ago. There was one person who I guess I became mutuals with on Twitter, and they messaged me to tell me that I had really inspired them to start creating more artwork and to create an Instagram. And that was just so flattering to me. I was so happy to hear that, because that's what you want. You want people to have an outlet, especially creative people, how important it is for us to be able to bare our souls in some capacity. It's just this innate drive within us. And I was incredibly flattered and happy to hear that. And I hope more people will go ahead and do that. Like if you find my work inspiring, and if you want to base some of your own work around it and bring it in your own direction, please do. Please do. I'd love to see it. So just go ahead and go for it. That's all I got to say.
Donald?
Yeah, he's still on mute.
Well, then I'm going
to
continue.
I just gave the best speech in the world, and the whole thing was on mute.
Oh, no.
No, it's okay. I can repeat it. I was essentially saying, imagine all the people that person will then go and inspire. So the effect is exponential and it's very powerful. Our movement needs more creators. We are a content, how do I say? We need more content that's an alternative to the degenerate content that's anti-white in our media that we live in, etc. Nullus, did you want to respond?
Oh no, not at all. I think everything was said very well said.
Nice. So let's kind of get ready and dive into the Imperium Art essay. And have you watched any of the shows, or do you want to comment a bit on the essay?
Yeah, I've watched a couple of episodes from you guys here and there. I have a tendency to listen to things with half an ear because I always turn things on while I'm doing other things. I did listen to the one that you had with Jerome. That was absolutely excellent. I listened to the one that you had last week with the musical artist. But yes, and that was really good. As far as the essay itself goes, there was a part that really stuck out to me because I haven't mentioned this yet, but I'll mention it now. Originally, when I went to college, I wanted to major in literature. So when Nullus was writing about the way world building has been completely overdone and the way it's gone from telling someone else's story to putting the reader into the story, I thought was very poignant. But I wouldn't say that it's the world building itself that does that. I'd say it's the way that the characters are now written as being empty. And I'd say that you see this particularly in something such as the Twilight series. Bella is a very, very empty, hollow character. She has no personality. And this shines through even in the movies, which, yes, I have watched all of them because I'm a woman and it's like crack, leave me alone. But
we'll give you a pass on that one.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. It happens, but
we're not talking about shoes, okay? I draw the line there. Okay.
Shoes are nice. Okay.
This is the Fabio of the 2020s, right?
You mean that nice pair of pointy flats? Yes. Okay. Anyways,
we'll have a discussion on shoes.
Literature. Bella is a completely empty vessel of a character. She has no personality. There's nothing special about Bella. There's nothing that sticks out in your mind about this character whatsoever. But that's on purpose because the point is that the female viewer can be Bella. And yes, it is a way of feeding narcissism. And what's interesting about literature, which I've said about visual art, is kind of flipped on its head. With visual art, the art is about the viewer. It's not about what the artist is necessarily trying to create. It's about what the viewer sees in it. What message is the viewer getting from it? As opposed to literature, where when you make the literature about the reader, it becomes more empty.
Right. Right.
Wow. So the idea of feeding narcissism through, quote, art, media, entertainment, it seems like a very clever form of cultural Marxism in a way, because the sort of, it's everything that's the opposite of community, the opposite of populism, the opposite of nationalism, collectivism, these things. And that would be narcissism, right?
I would say cultural capitalism and individualism because it's about the individual. It's incredibly atomized.
Precisely. That's well said.
Yeah. I mean, Marxism is the same, just the opposite side of the coin, because what you're saying is if it belongs to everyone, then it belongs to no one, right? And that's kind of what the Marxist is also saying. It's just, but the capitalist argument is just as valid, by the way. So I'm not trying to defend the other one.
Right. They're two sides of the same shekel.
Correct.
Shekel. Well done. Yeah, I was gonna get to that, but you well said.
I mean, it's two different ways of approaching the same method of controlling our people.
Right.
But
and
are two different methods of controlling our people.
Yeah, and it's just objectively bad. It's just not interesting, if you ask me. But yeah.
Well, it's about feeding the imagination of the person, but it's funny because it uses, like, for example, with Twilight, there's while Bella is a very, very empty character and the story itself is very mediocre and honestly kind of gay. Like, I really miss the vampire stories of old where the vampires were actual monsters, which, don't get me started, I'm about to go spurging about Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was amazing. I might do that.
It's one of my favorite movies. I'm glad you said that.
I love the book. Have you read the book?
Yeah. Well, the graphic novel is even really good too. But go on. Yeah.
But well, where they turned the story of the vampire being this hideous creature that uses lust into that lust being something good and desirable, and turning it sexy is kind of a sign of the times, I guess. But anyways,
Yeah.
the way that they use like the Twilight story, for example, what makes it so alluring is that it uses that seduction and desire through the character of Edward, who actually is a well-developed character, but it's an object of desire. So it makes you want to read more of it to put yourself in those shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So, but going to the vampire stories, what's interesting about Bram Stoker's Dracula is that in the case of Lucy, when Lucy becomes a vampire, the way that she is described as having, you know, the big full lips and her cleavage exposed and being super seductive and sexy, now that is just our beauty standard. That is just like the average beauty standard in popular culture, when back then Bram Stoker describes it as disgusting. In its seduction, it's really gross the way that she's doing this, you know, because that's something that's supposed to be very, very personal. It's over the top.
Yeah. It's a different time period.
Different values.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, actually. That opens up interesting questions about, again, like values, this aesthetics. I feel that we in the Imperium art zone, if you will, we in a sense have to invent those standards. You know, we do look to the past, but we're totally submerged in leftist culture, which is degenerate, atomized, all this other stuff we've talked about. And then you're pointing out that thing right there, that element right there, is quite fascinating. It sort of harkens back to, you know, classical art and you know, archaeofuturism. And what are those values? I feel as if artists need to really work with these questions. A lot of times, you know, we may be making art that is for the white positive movement, but we're living in a time where everything is sort of about, it's just very selfish. It's just like my own gratification and things. Whereas and maybe the Imperium artist has to think more in terms of, I'm doing this for my people, and I have certain standards that I'm maybe developing or living up to that maybe were set by great artists of the past. Or maybe I'm going to set my own standards and be a beacon of inspiration for other artists and people. So it's just a lot of, I'm just kind of philosophizing or musing basically on your reaction there. But were there other topics or themes or subjects in the? Go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to add to that. I mean, the poem I wrote, Illegitimate, is about this topic exactly, about how ideas and thoughts are inverted and twisted, and the golem becomes, or they try to invert the golem to become a symbol of positive aesthetics when it's not. And they're trying to twist our ideas into worshiping the golem, if you will. And that's what this poem, Illegitimate, is all about, because when you break it down, the golem is illegitimate. And as much as they try to change and break us, our creativity always awakens, always comes to surface, and we castigate the golem because our inherent nature is anti-golem, if you will. And that's kind of what you're referring to, Jay, when you're saying, you know, the monsters are now, you know, becoming the good guys, if you will, you know, in modern pop culture, in the movies, in these pop culture books. You know, they're trying to create beauty out of something that's inherently ugly and evil. And so that's what I wanted to say, that, you know, if anyone has a chance to read that poem, I also have it on my YouTube channel, and I think that speaks to this theme of inversion of aesthetic, and I think that, you know, you hit the nail on the head, Jay, with this whole concept of understanding values, how they change over the centuries, the decades, and again, that's natural. Values will always change. Right. At least, you know, the modern perception of values will always change. This is why in the Imperium Art essay, I speak about a moral absolute that has to be above us, that has to stand above us as a guidepost, if you will, that keeps us grounded as we're evolving and changing our popular, conception of aesthetics or of good and evil, you have that absolute morality above you that gives you that is kind of like directs you in the right path, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I think that's missing, because that tie has been severed through this connection that we used to have, naturally, this very natural understanding of reality and the metaphysical reality.
You want to respond to that, Jay?
Absolutely. And I'd especially like to address what you're talking about with inversion. And that seems to be the main theme in everything that we see today, like in popular media and art and everything else in culture. Everything is just completely upside down. And you see this with like shows like Lucifer, which I've only seen commercials for, where it takes what's evil and makes it look like it's good.
Exactly.
And you see this with the vampire stories, with everything else, with anti-heroes have become a huge theme, where the protagonist is actually evil, kind of like shows like Dexter, which I've, so that's the entire point of it. And I guess that would make our job to turn it back upside down again, which would be right side up.
Right.
Exactly. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. And yeah, although there are some things like in reference to the essay, I felt like a lot of it was a big repudiation of most of modernity and modern art, but I do actually stan a lot of abstract and modern art.
I'll let Donald handle that one.
I do like it. I do like a lot of it, and I actually that's been my most recent painting lately has been more non-objective and more abstract. And the reason why is because obviously when you take something that's more modern and abstract, it's not meant to be next to a Caravaggio in a museum. Right. What it's about what it adds to the space that you put it in.
Just as a yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's about another design feature. It's not a masterpiece within itself. It's the way that it comes together in a space to make the space itself a masterpiece. Like, I need some texture over here. This wall needs more color over there. But you're not trying to create something that is meant to be stared at and oohed and awed over, but something that comes together in the whole to make it more beautiful.
Yeah, and I should add to that poets like Ezra Pound and even the Italian futurists, they were postmodernists. They were modernists, not postmodernists. They were modernists. And again, I'm not trying to repudiate their value by any stretch of the imagination. Actually, I have a lot of admiration for their work. And so I also, and architecturally, I like Art Deco, for example, quite a bit, actually.
Oh, I love Art Deco.
So it's, I can't say that everything that was, I'm not saying that we should return to tradition, how that phrase is, although I do like the idea of returning to tradition from a kind of a conceptual point of view, but objectively and realistically, that's probably not practical, nor is it really productive. I think that what we're saying here is that we have to look at points in our continuity that were severed, and then look at those severed points and see what value is there and what subversion was there. So what I'm trying to really get at in the essay is for us to have a more critical view of these various eras and evolutions of aesthetics, of values, of morality, of art.
If I may,
Absolutely.
I wouldn't mind jumping in just a bit to talk a little bit about abstract expressionism. What's quite fascinating here, Jay defines herself as a designer. I define myself as a fine artist. And she does fine art and I do design. So, it all crosses over, but it's an interesting thing. So a lot of people, we have I don't know, I guess in the white positive sphere on the far right, whatever, we look at modernism, postmodernism aggressively and angrily in a way, with a bit of disgust. And so, but there is something to say about abstract expressionist painting, and I just want to kind of briefly talk about that, and then also point out the difference in, say, the way that Jay is referring to it as an interior design element, which it is and can be, But to look at the work on its own, say in a museum gallery, essentially it's called non-objective art. It takes the object out of the painting, and it's about painting. It's painting about painting. So in some way you could kind of say it's the jazz of painting, and but it's more abstract than that. Jazz isn't, I mean, there's Ornette Coleman abstract jazz, which is unlistenable, but it's the idea of taking shape, color, line, texture, form, pattern, movement, emphasis, all the elements and elements of design and these things, and combining them in a way that has aesthetic beauty to it, that has something that is strictly an aesthetic experience and is not historical or objective or per se philosophical. And it's just looking at the medium on its own merits in a very raw, basic way. So I think we can intellectually understand that, and we can aesthetically appreciate that. So, I do love certain abstract expressionist painters, and I hate others. So like I can still approach it that way, and we can approach it that way. But for the sake of our movement, Imperium art, if it were ever to somehow accommodate or incorporate abstract expressionism, I don't honestly know that it could, because I think these are two opposite trajectories, of purpose and culture, history and politics even, right? So if we were to use it in a way as a political weapon against the left, that would be interesting. That's an interesting concept. How could we do such a thing? So keep your mind open. It is the arts. We should have an open mind, I guess, to the extent that how does it serve our purposes? So I really find it refreshing to hear Jay's approach to that, to say, this wall needs some color, this area needs some texture, and it turns abstract expressionism more into design element, which can be very beautiful. But go on, Jay, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I did. And I'd even say a lot of like modern and abstract and expressionist stuff is it does actually have that continuity. It does have that cultural and ethnic voice to it. For example, if you want to Google sometime Scandinavian interior design, and you
Okay.
see the kind of art that they use, and it's pretty minimalistic, but not in the Japanese sense by any stretch. It's very much Scandinavian,
Mm,
but it also has a very, very natural element to it in the art styles and the way that they do it. And I think that harkens very much to their more recent than other European ethnic groups, pagan and tribal past. And it very much does in the simplicity of it, in the natural elements of it. Um, I would say that it's very ethnic and it's very them.
So this is extremely interesting. I mean, somebody would have to take it upon themselves to go out and make this kind of work and do this kind of work, but I can actually visualize it. I could see something, even in the sense of sculpture and using natural objects from nature to create works of art that may in some way reflect, say, Odinism or certain types of rituals or something, a relationship with nature and our own culture, these kinds of things. So that becomes very conceptual. And, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that it's conceptual. So the idea being that the idea is the art rather than the art is so much, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but a conceptual art is, it's an object that has to stimulate an idea or a thought or a theme, and that how the person responds to that concept is the art experience rather than the image itself. But so yeah, we're really getting under the hood here into the machinations of art and how it functions, what it can do. So it's quite interesting. Are there any other points on Nullus's essay on Imperium art that you'd like to respond to?
Not really, not in specific, nothing that jumps out to me.
Okay. Nullus, any more thoughts on that? And
Just that I think that we really have to look at all of these different expressions of art on a case by case basis.
mm,
We have to understand that, well, let me rephrase myself. Some artistic movements do have a manifesto. So we have to look at the manifesto of that particular movement and see what the intention is of that movement.
Mhm.
We have to look at the various expressions of the artists within that movement. I think that the Imperium Art essay, the Imperium Art project, is we always say, is a work in progress. So we are trying to figure out. That's why, the essay is also, we're trying to define something that hasn't been defined before, and so it's a huge undertaking. And I think that we're also, Donald and I, we're learning quite a bit as we're going. I think that ultimately the goal for us is to make sure that whatever we're representing as artists represents our biospirit, if you will, and represents our traditional connections to the metaphysical.
So, Jay, if there were an Imperium Art Manifesto, what would you want to say? What would you want it to say? What would you contribute to that?
Ooh, that's a hard question.
We've been really rough on you. That's not. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Let me deal for a second. Let me think about this. Is pretty much just try to reach into your ancestral soul and bring it out.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well done.
Although I will say my main critique of the essay, now this is my biggest critique of it, is format. You should really let me relay this out for you. You should let me make it into like a ebook format or something, because the text was very tiny and I was having trouble reading it on my tablet, and I could help you with that.
Oh, okay.
Spoken like a true designer.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm like, I can't highlight anything and take notes on my tablet, and it's all tiny, and I keep having to let me help him with this.
Yeah. All help is appreciated for sure.
And any kind of formatting or grammatical errors or any kind of any kind of editorial comments are always welcome.
Don't expect me to fix that stuff. I will read it out.
Yeah, that's in the spirit of what we're doing here with this documentary series on Imperium Art. We're open. We invite critique, and we're not kind of looking down our noses at anybody. We're trying to control our own narrative by giving a platform to our artists and creators. So, one day when the left becomes fully aware of Imperium Art, you can only imagine how they're going to attack it. So when, there's 35, 55, 85 episodes, etc., then there'll be so much content already here. And that's why it's important to ask these questions, go through all this. So that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Jay. Can you maybe just repeat once more where people can find you online?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed it so much.
Us too.
As far as finding me, you can find me on Instagram at Artemisian_aesthetic. You can find me on Telegram if you want to follow more of my arts and crafts stuff, not my graphics. It's J LaDarc's Cozy Arts and Crafts something. You'll see it. It's probably the only one with that name. Yeah, you'll put the link in there.
Yeah.
And I guess if you want to follow more of my, I guess, just musings as well as political commentary, I'm on Twitter at LaDarc with a C at the end. I'm sure you'll link that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I can be found.
Wonderful. This has been such a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, we recommend everybody check out the links below. I'm sure if you've got commissions or people who have commissions, Jay is our girl. So go to her and give her some work. Okay. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are, and we'll see you next time.